The Orville New Horizons, Electric Sheep, Episode 1. Well, the Orville is back.
Yep. And given the title, because when I saw the title, the first thing I thought of was the Philip K. Dick book that Blade Runner is based on. And
Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Yep. And I was right. The story had to do with something related to artificial people and consciousness and whatever else philosophy you want to go with.
Yeah. So a very deep philosophical episode, which seems to be the exact opposite of that shallow piece of crap that we watched right before it, Strange New World.
Yeah, I will say, just up front, if nobody's watched The Orville yet, Season 3, be aware, I don't know if this is a one-off with just this episode, or if this is going to be the direction forward, but the way I look at The Orville is Season 1, it started off as a comedy. Season 2, they mixed in some drama, but there was still comedy underneath there. This episode, this was like almost all drama. There was like a couple of jokes, but they were quick jokes. This was all drama. This was in some places, it was very heavy drama. It was touching on topics that were heavy topics. I don't know. I've seen people be upset saying they didn't like this episode. And I think the reason is this wasn't a ha-ha funny episode. This was a drama. This was a serious episode dealing with serious topics.
Yeah. I hope they go back to more of a Season 2 model of things where they mixed the drama and the comedy. I really enjoy watching that. But I mean, even in Season 2, they had some heavy topics that they covered.
There was still comedic undertones.
Yes.
There was even the jokes here were so minimal. This was a heavy episode.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that like that's a bad thing, but if it continues down this path for the next few episodes, like Season 3 is going to be this, you have to look at this as almost a rebooted series.
Yeah.
Because a couple of the characters acted very differently. Gordon being one of them, but I'm sure you'll get into that when you get into your synopsis.
So we start out the episode, and we have Marcus, Dr. Finn's son.
The elder son.
The elder son. And he's running down the corridors, and they're under attack from the Kaylon. And eventually you figure out that, and we're shown that this was a dream, a nightmare that he was having, because in his dream, Isaac is evil, and he is really struggling with forgiving Isaac for what happened with being attacked by the Kaylon. And that's essentially what this entire episode is about, what to do with Isaac.
You have to kind of pretend, the timing of this episode is a little bit iffy, because was it Identity? I think that was the two-parter season 2, where the Kaylon tried to invade the Union, the Earth, basically. You have to pretend like this happened shortly after that, because the Orville was at Space Dock getting refit, which, by the way, there's a lot of cool things about. We'll get into that later. They did a lot of things right here. If you're a tech geek and you like that sort of stuff with Star Trek, they did a lot of refitting with this ship that I thought was pretty cool. But you have to kind of pretend this happened like right after the Kaylon attack, because I looked at the episodes, and I think there were like 4 episodes after that two-parter Kaylon from Season 2.
Yeah.
So it makes this hard to kind of fit in with that, because you would have thought these sort of issues would have came up like right after that. So you just kind of have to pretend this happened after the Kaylon battle, like a bit after that.
One of the things that is new, they have this new, I guess it's not really a shuttle, it's more like a speeder.
I think it's a fighter.
Is it a fighter?
Yeah, it was
the Pterodon.
Yep, I think it was a one-seater fighter that Gordon was flying, and this could get interesting if they use it in battle, because I was...
Well, why else would you have it?
Well, right. So I'm hoping that this plays more into it, into the stories as they go on, because it was pretty cool. I thought the way they were demonstrating it was a bit iffy, and I'm sure you'll cover that in a bit. But the concept of what that fighter was, I thought that was really cool. So I think this could turn into something cool.
Well, I figure we'll just cover it right now.
Okay.
You thought it was cooler than I did. Okay, so they have this fighter. They tested it. It felt to me like they were testing it for way too long, way too close to Space Dock.
Well, that was the negative, because your sister even mentioned, as they were test piloting, because they had it was going against some drones.
Yeah.
And the music they were playing, I think your sister said it sounded like a Disney soundtrack or something. And it did. It was this playful music that really didn't fit in with the test flight they were doing. So I agree with you. That that test flight that they did was way too long with the drones, and I'm not saying that wasn't a problem, because I agree with you.
Well, this episode was 1 hour and 10 minutes long.
Yeah, I just thought the concept of the fighter...
The concept is cool.
Because they actually have something that can fight back other than just the main ship's weapons. Yeah. So I personally think that's cool. And I thought the fighter had that same back end. I don't know what those things are. Those are the engines. The engine things. The fighter had that, but it was designed a bit differently. You could tell it was Union technology, but it was a little bit differently done. I like the design of the fighter, I guess is what I'm saying, and the concept of what it was. Gordon kind of implied it was like a neural interface or something that he was using. So I just think the concept could be cool. But I agree with you that whole drone test flight took way too long. And it looks like, I guess since we're on technology here, they didn't go into specifics, but it looks like they got some sort of upgrade to their reactor, their quantum drive, because Lamar said something, I think it was Lamar, said something like, with these upgrades, our engines will be able to take the load like a heavy cruiser. Yeah. So I think that could come into play. And when they showed the reactor, there were a couple of new sets this season. You got to see Isaac's laboratory. I don't know if we ever saw that before. If we did, this looks like it's different. And then 2, we saw, I don't know if it was the reactor room. It wasn't just engineering. It was like the reactor room.
Yeah, I think it was the reactor room.
And that was an interesting scene because you had this ball of reaction that was happening in the center of the room. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, so they definitely souped up the ship. So beyond that, we see Isaac trying to interact with the crew. He goes into the mess hall and he sits down with a group of people and they get up and they leave. And one of them comes back and she says some really nasty things to him.
She tells a story about why she dislikes Isaac.
Yeah, she was on the Quimby and her best friend died and she blames Isaac.
Well, the Quimby was during the battle with the Kalons, the Quimby was lost. They were in an escape pod. The escape pod malfunctioned, so somebody had to stay behind and eject it manually. So her friend had to eject it manually and saved her, but then she died.
And she blames Isaac for that. And she apparently is the new navigator because she sits next to Gordon on the bridge. And I didn't like her.
I don't think you were supposed to.
I despise her.
I don't think you were supposed to. She was not a nice person. I could understand her point of view, but she was not a nice person. I
mean, we'll see if the actress herself grows on me, but even...
Well, her acting was iffy.
God.
But the early episodes of the first season of the Orville, a lot of those characters, the acting was iffy. So I'm going to give the actress a chance to grow into the part. But yeah, she was unlikable, which I think was on purpose, and her acting was iffy. I will say about Isaac, they redesigned Isaac a bit. His head shows reflections now, and I think your sister pointed out it makes him look like he's always turning his nose up at people, and I think that's on purpose. And then his body, they've got like these anatomy pieces that are on his body. It's kind of like metal plated pieces or plastic pieces. He doesn't look like a guy in a costume anymore. He actually looks more like a robotic entity. So I personally liked it. Your sister did not like it. So.
I preferred the old look. But I don't like change.
I thought the reflective on his head, it made him look more alien, and I thought that was kind of cool. He didn't look so friendly, but that's just me.
Yeah. So anyway, while Isaac is in the mess hall getting messed with by Charlie, the ensign from hell, somebody is in his lab painting murderer on the wall. And
you don't see them. You don't see the person painting it. You just see when Isaac shows up there, he sees the words in his lab.
Yeah. Finally, it's brought to Ed and Kelly's attention that this kind of treatment toward Isaac has been going on ever since what Isaac called, was it the event?
The event.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it's clear they really made sure to drive home that Isaac lacks empathy. This guy, he's an artificial life form. He doesn't have feelings. He doesn't understand.
I guess to recap, again, I don't know if people have seen season 2, but when the Kalon were attacking Earth, Isaac was going along with that for a while, and then he eventually turned on his people. And I guess one other thing to note, not that it so much matters in the story directly, but you and I had a conversation last night after watching this. They mentioned in season 2, when the Kalon attack was happening, Isaac was a later generation construction. So the other Kalon were around during when the biologicals were oppressing them. But Isaac wasn't. Isaac was made after all that happened. Mm-hmm. So like when this ensign was having all this venom toward Isaac, I was asking you, because I was talking to you after we watched the episode, why is she so mad at him? Other than going along with that for far too long, why are you mad at him? He actually saved you. And I guess the concern, because they mentioned this a couple of times, is they're not sure if Isaac is still covertly spying on the Union, because that's essentially what he was doing for the first season and a half of the Orville.
Yeah, but he didn't know that.
But he didn't know that. He just thought he was sending reports back.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't know about any of this sinister stuff that the early generation Kalons knew. So that's why I didn't quite understand. It's like, but he was a later generation Kalon. He didn't know about any of that stuff. He was just doing his job.
Yeah.
But as I pointed out to you last night, we were laying around talking about this episode, which is what you're supposed to do with good science fiction. So they must have done something right if we were having conversations like this.
Oh, completely agree. So I'll just finish out the story description and then we can talk about the issues. As it turns out, it was Marcus who painted murderer on the wall in Isaac's lab. He tells Isaac that he wishes Isaac was dead. And Isaac kills himself. And
in the way he did that and the way it was portrayed, I mean, it was pretty heavy the way he did it. He basically fried his synapses, but like the way he did it, he was like giving some updates because it was being recorded about what might help with this efficiency and this efficiency. And then just kind of matter-of-factly, he says, I wish good things for the Finn family. And then he just overloads himself. And it was just very, very matter-of-factly and just fries his head.
And just drops on the floor,
yep.
Yeah.
That was a heavy scene. I mean, there were a lot of scenes. I don't know if that one was one without music. There was a lot of scenes in this episode without music to really drive home what they were doing. That's why this was not a comedic episode.
Claire is struggling because she has conditioned herself to not feel anything at this point because she couldn't deal with the fact that she loved this entity who was responsible for all that murder that the Kalons engaged in on the humans. So she's having to deal with her feelings. Marcus feels tremendously guilty because he's the one that told Isaac to drop dead. And so he's struggling with that because he feels like it's all his fault. Ty is responding to this by going into the holodeck, the simulator.
Yes.
And using a simulation to talk to Isaac. And of course, Claire catches him doing this and explains to him that it's not healthy to live in a fantasy world where Isaac isn't dead inside the simulator, and bad things can happen if you keep doing that. That's definitely something we've seen on this show as well.
The thing, though, with Dr. Finn, I think she was projecting qualities onto Isaac when she did have her relationship with him that didn't exist. I mean, they never covered her ex and what bad things might have happened in that relationship. But I always interpreted that Dr. Finn tried that relationship with Isaac because he was basically a blank slate.
Yeah.
And she could project on him whatever she wanted. And he'd go along with it because Isaac was just, everything was new and data, he was collecting data on. So, yeah, you want to try that? Okay, I'll do that. And I think she was projecting stuff on him that was never there.
Yeah.
Because I think she even kind of mentioned that she was talking to Kelly because she couldn't cry or anything, Dr. Finn. She's like, I don't know how to feel. And she had that scene with Kelly in the conference room.
Yeah.
Where Kelly was like, well, why don't you go to places that remind you of Isaac, and then maybe some of that will, be clear to you on exactly what you did feel for Isaac.
Even how she feels now.
Yeah.
Which it turns out so she's in the simulator going to this restaurant that she went to with Isaac. And
she started crying in the simulator because she remembered that, because that was when they went on their first date, and he took on that human form while they were in the restaurant. And then she sat there, and she was walking around the restaurant at first, and then she sat down at the table. I'm assuming it's the table they were at, and then she started crying.
Yeah, I mean, so it's obvious that, even though he did those horrible things, she should still be able to mourn the person she thought he was. Because you have every right to do that.
But what horrible things did he do?
Well, I know some people say he should have interceded before he did, when the Kalon had decided to go exterminate humanity.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, I would argue back, what exactly was he supposed to do? They would have just deactivated him.
I don't think he killed a single person.
No. I mean, when they were in that hallway and the other Kalon were about to space that one guy, he tried to explain to them the logic against doing that, and then they ordered him to go somewhere else. And this is Isaac we're talking about. He probably didn't even think about what was going to happen to that guy, that his fellow Kalon would deceive him. They would send him off somewhere else so they could do what they wanted to do and not listen to his recommendation. So I don't even know that he understood what was about to happen when he left. But even if he had done something at that point, I don't know how successful he would have been in stopping them. Again, he probably would have just been deactivated, and he wouldn't have been able to succeed in ultimately stopping them when he did.
That's what I think they're going for here. I think that Ensign is eventually going to figure out
Charlie Burke.
Isaac really wasn't at fault for this. He was just in a bad situation.
Yeah, because, I mean, there are a number of things I could compare this to. I mean, in Isaac's situation, it's like blaming the computer itself because a bunch of Nazis were using that to keep track of the people they want to kill. You don't blame the computer. It's not the computer's fault what those other people used it for, which may not be a good analogy to some people, but I mean, that's the way that I see that. I mean, Isaac is an artificial life form. He was sent there to collect information. He was doing his job. He didn't know what they were using it for. But when he did find out what they were about to do, when they were about to kill Ty, that's when he said no more. I mean, he tried to talk them out of spacing that ensign, or the engineer, in season 2. He did what he could when he found out what they were up to. Blaming him for all of this is misplaced anger.
Which I think was on purpose.
Yes.
That's why I think this is that new character is going to eventually realize that she made a mistake in harsh judgment because she didn't have all the facts.
Yeah.
However, Gordon was taking the side of Isaac's at fault here. I don't trust him anymore.
Yeah.
And that one didn't make sense to me. I was trying to figure out the only thing I can come up with is when in season 2, when Gordon was out there in that Krill fighter and he was fighting the Kalon and he saw people in ships just getting destroyed, that maybe that's when he started forming a different opinion of Isaac. Because I was surprised when Gordon said that to her. Yeah, I agree with you. Like, that surprised me that Gordon would have said that.
He didn't agree that Isaac should have been left deactivated, but he did agree that maybe he shouldn't have been sent back to the Orville. Again, I mean, what were they supposed to do with him? Because they're suspicious he might be sending information back to the enemy. What, you going to put him in an internment camp? Gee, where have I seen that before?
Well, if I remember, in season 2, after the Kalons were pushed back, I believe Admiral Halsey said that they wanted to keep him and dissect Isaac for technology benefits.
Yeah.
And Mercer talked him out of doing that.
Yeah.
So I think his alternative was basically to be dissected for technology advances.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how that gets unpacked through the rest of the season, because obviously with Ensign Nasty Pants, that's going to keep coming up. And apparently the several members of the crew, they feel the same way she does. So
I think there's a lot of people on that crew. Because there was some interesting dialogue, because as they were trying to see if they could bring Isaac back, it turns out that this new character, what's her name, Carly?
Charlie.
That Charlie, they had to be able to think in a certain 4-dimensional way, and I guess she excelled at that in the academy or whatever. And so Mercer was trying to talk to her to help, and she refused to help. And there was some interesting philosophical posturing going on, including Mercer saying something like, well, let's show the enemy that we're better than them because we respect life, even when they don't. And so there was a lot of interesting philosophical conversations happening between Mercer and Charlie.
I also liked that he told her flat out that her monopoly on grief was wearing thin.
Yeah, he said, you're not the only one that lost people in that battle.
Yeah.
And because she was just dragging that out like she was the only one affected. And like, Seth MacFarlane played this role
really well.
Like this episode, he played it straight-laced and like a Star Trek captain. I mean, he wasn't fooling around.
Yeah.
He even relieved her of duty when he ordered her to do something.
And she refused.
And he said, you're relieved, get off my bridge. That's what I wish Pike would do with Ortegas, but Mercer did it to this person.
Yeah, and he was right to do so. She disobeyed a direct order. Personally, I would have tossed her in the brig, but that probably has more to do with I can't stand the nasty little bitch. Yeah, because, I mean, walking around being all hate-filled like that all the time, people aren't going to want to be around you. They just aren't.
Well, what sort of decisions are you going to make, too?
Bad ones. Because it's all out of malice and anger. One of the things I will say about this is that it's obvious that just about everybody on this ship should be in some sort of therapy at this point to deal with their feelings from the loss that they have suffered, not to mention any kind of post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, you see the nightmares that Marcus is having.
Apparently he has those on a regular, like he mentioned to her, his mom.
He should be in treatment for stress
He's
disorder.
having nightmares like all the time. I want to restate this in case somebody hasn't seen this season yet. The reason we're talking about this seriously, and the joke might be, why are you talking seriously about this comedy joke show? This episode was not a joke episode. I mean, it's hard to explain other than to recommend you watch this. This was like a rebooting of the show. This was a serious episode. It's hard to explain if you've seen the Orville before and the comedy they have laced through it. This did not have any of that. This was a very serious episode. The music was different. A lot of scenes there wasn't any music because they were trying to hammer home how serious the dialogue was they were having. One of the things I did appreciate, unlike Strange New Worlds, because we mentioned this in our review for that, how quickly everybody talked, and it was just quippy, talk, fast. There was slow, deliberate conversation in this episode of The Orville, and they were having philosophical debates back and forth, and it was slowly done, much like if you like The Next Generation, this was done very much like a very good Next Generation episode.
Yeah, and it was interesting because in the midst of all this, they run into a Kaylon ship that starts attacking them. So they fly into a storm around a planet, and in traditional submarine warfare style, they take their torpedoes, stick them in a shuttle, and then detonate the shuttle so that it looks like they have exploded, and the Kaylon are tricked by this, and they leave. And then the Orville flies out of the storm. I mean, that's how it should be done.
Well, it reminded me of Balance of Terror, because that's what the Romulans did at first to try to get the Enterprise off their ass, was they did exactly that, including, I believe they put the Centurion body in there.
They did.
To try to trick the Enterprise to think that you got me.
Yeah. You know, so obviously that's how you do an homage to something else. Because obviously the Orville isn't a submarine. Obviously this was done on previous iterations of Star Trek. But they didn't rip it off beat for beat like Strange New Worlds did to Deep Space Nine.
Last week, yep.
Yes. So that was interesting. And if this had aired last week, the timing would have been so appropriate. The fact that it was a week later still, that was fresh in my mind from last week, what they did on Strange New Worlds. That amused me a bit. So what happens is Marcus goes to Ensign Burke, Nasty Charlie, and tells her that he feels responsible for Isaac choosing to kill himself. This is actually one of the few good moments that we had with her in this episode, because she tells Marcus that she doesn't want him to be like her. And I think she is expressing that she recognizes the miserable person that she is and how unhappy she is. And she doesn't want that for Marcus. So she goes ahead and she helps Lamar reactivate Isaac. She tells Isaac straight out she didn't do it for him. And the implication is that she did it for Marcus so that he wouldn't have to carry that guilt.
And I guess to explain, because I know a lot of Trek people like how do they bring back Isaac? That seems pretty simple. So they tried several ways. They had Yaphet go inside of Isaac like he did before to try to help out. And Yaphet said, I can't do anything. Everything's all fried in there. So what it was deep down inside of Isaac's head, there was like this backup thing. But it was like a piece of technology that was like existed in, I think, 4 dimensions. And that's why they needed Charlie's help, because this was beyond their ability to try to restore that backup. They actually did explain it wasn't a simple matter of, hey, let's just rub stuff around and Isaac will be fine. I mean, they had this backup thing of, I guess, his core, but it was a multi-dimensional thing and it was beyond the Orville science to be able to deal with it. But Charlie was the only one who had any sort of instinct with those dimensions. I would have thought Lamar could have done that too, but...
Well, that was one piece of the story that bothered me. The fact that Charlie was just naturally gifted at this, rather than she was an expert in this field because she'd been working on it for decades. That bothered me a lot. I'm getting really tired of these gifted young people who just are lucky enough to be born so gifted. I'm so sick of that shit.
Well, Lamar was born gifted.
Well, no,
and then
he's intelligent, but that's different from having this gift.
That's true. He wasn't just...
For, this spatial bullshit. I mean, they just really rubbed me the wrong way. So like you said, I would have thought that this would have been something that Lamar should have been able to handle, but they needed this fresh out of the, well, I guess fresh off the Quimby. I don't know how long she's actually been in, but she looks really young. This gifted ensign. I mean, just give me a break. So that bothered me a bit, obviously. Didn't help that she had a very nasty attitude either, so... I mean, I really hope they change that quickly, because I don't think I can take an entire season of that bullshit.
But going back to the Marcus conversation she was having with him, I agree with you. That was really well done as far as he was pleading with her for help. And at first she wasn't going to give it.
Yeah.
But then when he was explaining why, because I think she asked, well, why do you care? And then Marcus said, well, right before he did it, I basically told him to go kill himself.
Yep. And
that's what Isaac did. And so she, I guess... continue on with your synopsis, but there was that conversation between those two that was really well done, by the way. It was slow, methodical, it was good dialogue.
Yeah, so again, that was like the one good thing she did, because it was obvious. She didn't flat out state it. It was left to the viewer to draw that conclusion, but it was clear that she did that for Marcus, so he wouldn't have to carry guilt like she does. Because, I mean, obviously her friend gave up her life to eject that escape pod. So she probably carries a lot of guilt about that she's probably projecting onto Isaac, but they'll probably get to that in a later episode, I would assume. So after that, obviously Isaac is revived, and Claire, since she's the doctor, she does the psychological stuff on the ship too. I mean, she's asking Isaac, if he's going to try to kill himself again. And because his reasons were that the crew would be more efficient without him there, it's like, hell yes, I'm going to try to kill myself again. I mean, it was... So that actually
and then she wasn't happy with that answer. Isaac, you can't do that.
That was a great way to make light of a very serious issue. Because, I mean, that's what that needed at that point in time. Because it's like, yeah, he did this based on his own logic. So the logic... The information he has really hasn't changed until Claire changes it. Of course, he would come to that same conclusion over and over and over again unless you gave him different data to work with. So Claire does tell him that the one factor that he didn't account for was time. That in time, people would change their minds. That it wouldn't be like this forever. So I think that is enough to get him to stop, because she told him that, if he's thinking about doing that again, to come to her instead of killing himself. So that was actually pretty good. I thought that was an excellent way to deal with that subject matter, because it's obvious he's still suicidal, but she's given him some logic that will stop him from immediately just offing himself again.
Well, plus it added the fact that, I mean, maybe, again, it depends on how sentient you think Isaac is and if he has any emotions. Mm-hmm. But he made it clear, I didn't commit suicide because I was sad. I committed suicide because me being around was causing the ship here not to be very efficient.
Yes.
Which made a lot more sense once he said that. It's like, yep, it's not a matter of, he was just too sad and had to end it all. He, in his mind, he computed that no, everybody, there's too many people affected by me negatively, and it's affecting the ship, and I'm just going to remove myself from the equation so that the ship can perform better again.
I mean, I thought it was obvious that that's why he did it in the first place, was for ship efficiency, because that was the logical thing to do, which probably exposes a lot about me right there. So that wasn't a surprise for me. That's why I enjoyed it so much when he actually said that, and she confronted him like, well, you're not going to try to do that again. And it's like, of course he is, because the logic for him is still the same. So that was interesting. The other interesting thing was that Lamar, he's got a new, I don't know if I'd call her a girlfriend, but a romantic partner, shall we say. And the culture on her planet is that suicide is a personal choice. And I found that interesting. So, I mean, there was a lot going on in this episode from a philosophical standpoint that could be discussed. This was just so much better than anything I have watched from, well, all of JJ Trek, all the Secret Hideout crap with Kurtzman, all of that. I mean, this is so much better than new Star Trek.
Well, this week was a weird week because Strange New Worlds this week allegedly sells itself as a drama, and it was trying to do comedy and failed miserably, by the way. The Orville, which is selling itself usually as a comedy, they went hard drama this episode, and for the most part, I think they pulled it off.
Yeah, and at the end of the episode, you see Marcus. Marcus goes to see Isaac. He doesn't say anything to him or anything like that. He just goes and looks in on him at the lab, and then he leaves. So it's clear that Marcus has had a weight lifted off of him. However, I'm sure he's still struggling with this. And one other thing that Claire said to Isaac that actually makes a lot of sense, it's harder to hate from up close. So the fact that he's still on that ship, the more he interacts with people, the harder it's going to be for those people to continue to hate him. You can't other somebody when you know them, or at least you shouldn't be able to if you're a healthy person. So this episode was just so good. I mean, there were things that I didn't like about it, obviously. I enjoy more the comedic stuff, and I was a bit disappointed there wasn't more of that. However, with the subject matter, I can understand that. Sometimes you have to have dramatic episodes that are low on the comedy. So we'll just see where the season goes from here. I was disappointed that Gordon barely had any lines, and what he did have that wasn't what I expected to be coming out of his mouth, that he would agree with that nasty Charlie about Isaac. We barely saw Bortus, so that was also disappointing. But I did look at the titles for some of the upcoming episodes, and since Topa is in one of the episode titles, clearly we're going to see more from Bortus and his family. So I'll just have to sit tight and wait for that.
Yeah, I enjoyed this more than you did, I think. Not that you didn't enjoy it, but I don't know if this reboot is going to be a thing for the rest of the season, because I don't know how I feel. I enjoyed the first 2 seasons of The Orville, but this more hardcore drama that they did this episode, yes, it feels like a reboot, but I'd be okay with this new show. I mean, this new show I think I would enjoy. But if they went back to the old way of doing it, I obviously liked The Orville, so I would continue to go with that too.
Yeah.
So for me, I guess it's win-win. There were lots of things that I liked here. When they were in Space Dock and they were actually talking about all the upgrades they were doing. And it reminded me of the old Next Generation days when the tech talk actually sounded like it meant something before it turned into technobabble. They were trying to give their reality, their science, some believability, and I appreciated that. And having the Space Dock background in order to have that exposition on how things worked, I thought that was interesting. As I said, the new fighter they introduced, I think that they only introduced one. I think they said it was like a prototype. I don't know if that's going to be the only one or if it's going to be multiple ones being put on the ship. But I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the new Isaac design. As I said, the reflections on his face. Now, I even noticed with the ship, the Orville ship itself, it seemed like in the first 2 seasons, the ship's hull was like just kind of matty, where you didn't have any reflections on it. And now I'm noticing when it's flying by, you're seeing reflections on it. I'll just assume that's part of the upgrade and they have some new plating or something that's causing the different reflections. But the ship looks a bit different. There's reflections on it now. And I really enjoyed this episode. I'm probably going to go back and watch this weekend again, because now the shock of knowing that this episode didn't have really any comedy in it, because I was expecting comedy, like it's the Orville. So I'm going to go back and watch it again as a Star Trek episode and see how I can interpret it, because I was shocked there for a while, because I thought, oh, they're going to set up like 15, 20 minutes of this, and then they're going to turn it around and make it a big ha-ha. Yeah, they didn't make it a big ha-ha. So now that I know that I can go back and watch it again and see how it works for me. But I enjoyed it. Anybody who hasn't watched this episode yet but is used to the Orville, know that going into this, that this is the most dramatic episode this series has ever done. There's a few jokes in there, but I mean they're so minor that they're barely in there. That you would say they don't even exist for all practical purposes.
Yeah.
And for those of you that might watch this and say, man, I tried the Orville, and especially in season 1, and it was just too much Family Guy, I would argue season 2 you should try, but maybe try it again here. This was a Star Trek episode.
Yep.
And so if you didn't like the Orville before because it was too much Family Guy, try this episode. See what you think of it, because I thought it was really good.
It was. So I'm looking forward to next week, that's for sure.
It's nice to talk about something positive again.
Yeah.
Because all these secret hideout Star Trek complaining about the horrible crap they're making. I mean, yes, at first it's kind of fun to just jab and make fun at their stupidity. But, oh my gosh, after a while that just weighs on you. And it just gets so hard to continue doing that.
Oh, plus, I feel like Ned Flanders, well, he'd sit there and record TV and then take notes of all the offensive stuff, and then he'd like mail it to the censors or whatever it was. I mean, oh my God, I didn't want to feel like that anymore. Yeah,
because I don't want this channel, we don't want to make it some sort of hate channel. That's not at all what this is about.
We're here because we want things to be better. And the only way things are going to get better is by pointing out what's not working.
Well, I actually thought Strange New Worlds might have been okay. I didn't go into that hating it. Just after episode 1, oh my gosh, it was so horrible. Picard's garbage, Discovery's garbage. We covered The Expanse on here, even though I complained a bit about The Expanse in the first episode of last season. I enjoyed The Expanse, and I enjoy the Orville. I'm looking forward to making more Orville reviews on this channel, because I don't want everything to be negative here. I actually want to talk about positive things, because that's how we're meeting people in the comments. I'm finding a lot of people there that I have a lot in common with when it comes to looking at things.
Well, I think the thing is that, at least from my perspective, there used to be, especially with the Next Generation, well, and the original series, obviously, too, but it would cover issues that you could now sit down and talk to people about and explore from different angles. And being able to philosophically talk about things from different perspectives, I miss being able to do that, because Star Trek hasn't been able to do that for me for, I guess, decades now. I mean, when you think about it. And it's nice to have that back with the Orville. I mean, even with The Expanse, I was able to do that as well. Shows like that these days are few and far between. So it's nice to actually have one back again.
Yeah. I hope it continues along a quality path. Whether or not it's going to be comedic, go back to comedic, or be drama, we're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah.
But I was very surprised by this episode, and on reflection, I enjoyed it. And I think I'm going to rewatch it this weekend, and I'm looking forward to next week and doing a review next week, because talking about positives, I needed this.
Yep.
All this secret hideout crap was just, it was too much to just, and then Obi-Wan. I mean, we did our part 1 to 3. Part 1, 2, 3. I guess 1, 2, 3 or TR3.
Parts 1 through 3.
There you go.
There you go, yeah.
That was horrible to, I mean, it made me so sad, because that's Obi-Wan Kenobi. His character is one of hope. Like, he's an optimistic type of person. How they broke him down like that was so depressing to watch.
Well, we will do another video of that after the series is finished. We'll do episodes 4 through 6 and see how it ends up. But yeah, I mean, after watching the animated Clone Wars and that animated series Rebels, to be given this was very disappointing. So, but that's again another show. This is the Orville we're talking about here. So at least there's one bright thing that I can count on every week.
We'll
At least
see.
for a while.
We'll see.
Yeah.
But this episode was
hopeful.
was a good start to the season.
Yeah, so I would love to hear everybody else's thoughts on this. Did you like this episode? What did you think of the content? How does this compare for you to what they're calling Star Trek these days? We will be doing this again next week, and I look forward to your comments.
Take care.